saw a little pop-up as below, and you will be muted for the majority of this meeting, but we will take questions and comments in the chat box on the bottom. Right now, I just want to make sure it's especially important to acknowledge that we in San Francisco are on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who were the original inhabitants of San Francisco. We recognize that we benefit from living and working on their traditional homeland, and we affirm their sovereign rights as the First Peoples. Before we get started on redistricting, I'd like to introduce you to the League of Women Voters. So for over 100 years, our League of Women Voters of San Francisco is a nonpartisan political nonprofit that defends democracy. We provide education to encourage people to vote in elections and participate in government. We also engage in advocacy to influence public policy that benefits the community. We do not support or oppose candidates or political parties. The League is led and run by its volunteer members, so many of you which are here today. And these members register voters. They study community issues, develop policy positions, and serve on government committees. They give people election information through voter guides, ballot recommendations, candidate forums, and so much more. Really, thank you to all of our members for what you do to support this work on behalf of the League and the community here in San Francisco. So the League, we welcome people of all genders who want to take an active role in the future of our democracy. So this is when I have to make a plug. If you are not yet a member of the League and this sounds like something you'd be interested in, please consider joining us today. We would very much appreciate your support and involvement. You can join us at lwvsf.org. So now about redistricting. Redistricting is a once-in-a-decade opportunity to redraw San Francisco's supervisorial districts to create a more fair, equitable representation in our local government. And our goals for local redistricting in San Francisco we have four. One is to advocate for more fair, equitable, transparent, and accessible local redistricting process. The second is to educate people about what redistricting means, why it matters, and how to get involved. Third is to communicate so people can more easily learn about and participate in redistricting. And the fourth is collaborate with others to increase engagement in the local redistricting process. Earlier this year, we at the League assembled a task force that meets every month to work on these goals. And all of you here today, I invite you to join this group and task force. Our volunteers attend and observe meetings about the redistricting process. Last month, we also authored a letter to the mayor, the Board of Supervisors, Department of Elections, and the Election Commission, and the city attorney with our recommendations to ensure a fair, equitable, transparent, and accessible local redistricting process. If you'd like to know more information about this letter and how to get involved, you can go to our website at lwvsf.org/redistricting. That's going to be our one-stop shop for all things redistricting, and we're going to continue to update the website in the coming weeks and months as we continue our work. So today we're going to be holding this event to really start educating our neighbors and our own community here in San Francisco on redistricting and how to get involved. I'd like to give a special thanks to the members who've been really active on the redistricting task force. Namely, I'd like to thank Mallory, Lauren, Rafi, Jennifer Helton, Jenny Say, Nelena, Jennifer Wagner, and Danielle Deibler for a lot of their hard work in spearheading today's event, as well as our membership co-chairs, Cheryl Harris and Dee Moore, for helping put together today's excellent event. And I'm very excited to hear from our speakers as well as the questions today. So without much more rambling for me, I'm going to hand it over to Danielle Deibler, the Vice President of Voter Services, who'll be moderating our discussion today.
Hello. I have just two little slides that I'm going to go through for everybody. Let me present this. All right. So our agenda for today, in case you didn't know, is for us to talk with Helen Hutchison. She's going to give us kind of a redistricting 101 at the state and local level. And then our second speaker is Eric McDonnell. We're also going to talk a little briefly about taking local action. We're going to do about a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. And then we are going to have a set of closing announcements. And as Allison said, just make sure that you understand that Any questions are going to be submitted via the chat. You won't necessarily be able to see them, but the co-host will be able to see them, and that they will make sure that they get into the speakers. And then without further ado, I am going to introduce Helen Hutchison. She's going to be our first speaker. So Helen is a past president of the League of Women Voters of California, and she's a current member of the League of Women Voters of California's board. She joined the board first as a government director and then as a vice president for advocacy and programs in 2008. And while serving the state league, she's been active in strategic planning initiatives, referendums, human resources, training, legislation, ballot measures, redistricting, all over the place. And she's been a member of the League of Women Voters since 1969. And I will introduce Eric, who is our second speaker, when he comes up for his slot. So I'm gonna, without further ado, I am gonna hand it off to Helen. And just give me 1 second, because she also has some slides that she's gonna be sharing. Okay,
yeah,
take it away.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. And I am gonna get my slideshow going here. And I'm really happy to be here. I am actually just across the bay in Oakland, so I feel like I'm almost there with you in San Francisco. I am going to do a quick review of what redistricting is, why it matters, and then an introduction to the state redistricting process. Excuse me. I'm going to do a very quick intro to local redistricting, and then I'm going to turn it, then Eric will be doing a lot more about local stuff. So I'll go there. So I'm going to start at the beginning, just a reminder about districts, that we create political districts because we want to allow people who live in them to vote for candidates to represent them in some kind of a lawmaking body. That can be everything from a school board to the state legislature to US Congress and lots in between. So the US Constitution requires that political districts have the same number of residents. The goal is to make sure that each member of Congress represents the same number of people across the country. This requirement's not absolute population inequality, but it needs to be pretty darn close. This same requirement applies to districts at all levels of government, including the state legislative districts, local districts for your board of supervisors, city councils, and school boards. So let's look at the population requirements. Here's a very simple district drawn up. We have 4 districts, each of them have 5 people. So officials elected from each district would represent the same number of people. And it's really important to remember that these political districts include all residents and not just voters, not just people of voting age. It includes everyone who lives there because we are all represented in the same way. So over time, people move from one area to another. Some regions grow in population and others see fewer people living there. Because of this, political districts can become uneven in numbers over the years and no longer be equal. So we have an example here. And the 2 districts on the right now have more people than the 2 on the left. So every 10 years, we count everyone in the country via the census. It's mandated by the Constitution to make sure that we have equal numbers in our districts across the country. After the census finishes, district boundaries need to be redrawn to even out the size of every district, and that's redistricting. It happens at all levels of government. The process of drawing new district maps is based on the census data. In this example, the blue dotted lines represent the old district boundaries. These black lines represent the new district boundaries. With the new lines in place, each district now contains 6 people, so we're equal again. Seems pretty straightforward and simple, so I'm going to take a bit of a closer look now. The way district maps are drawn impacts which groups of voters have the voting power to elect candidates, or at least influence the outcome of elections in their district. In this example, we have a racial group that makes up 1/4 of an area's population. If we draw the district lines this way, there are 4 districts, and the racial or ethnic communities make up only 1/4 of each of the districts. This is called cracking, and it refers to fragmenting concentrations of minority populations among multiple districts to ensure that they have no effective voice in any one district. If a community could be 60% of a district, but instead is split so that it's 20% of 4 different districts, that's cracking. Chances are those communities will not have much of a say in the elections in any of these districts or have much influence with their elected officials. In this example, the minority population is packed into a single district, again diminishing their ability to have a full representative voice. Packing refers to concentrating as many people from a minority group as possible into as few districts as possible. This again limits the total number of districts in which they could have influence. And gerrymandering is the intentional manipulation of the redistricting process by the people in political power to keep political power. Things could be different if we draw the district lines a different way. Here in the communities of color make up over 3/4 of the population in this top middle district. And they make up half of the district in the district to the right. The chances are that they'll have significant influence on the elections in this district where they make up 3/4 of the population. And they also have a stronger chance to advocate in the district where they make up half the population. So they then are in a stronger position to advocate with elected representatives to meet their needs. Now, these slides really oversimplify the process of drawing district maps. There's lots of other legal requirements that apply how district maps must be drawn. The Federal Voting Rights Act provides protection for racial and ethnic communities. So in the situation that I was using right here, they would actually be protected and have a right to complain and sue if this actually happened. Then so that ensures that racial and ethnic communities have opportunities to elect candidates of their choice. So why does it matter who draws the district lines and what the rules are? One important reason is that elected officials can have different goals for drawing political districts than a commission of community members who do this. Elected officials are interested in getting reelected or seeing someone elected that they prefer. This is really not to criticize elected officials, it is human nature. And sometimes elected officials draw district maps that focus on what they want over other issues. That means that the maps they draw may not take into account the interests of cities and communities who have not been represented well. So there's multiple levels of redistricting going on in California, and I'm going to start by looking at the state level. In 2010, the power to draw new district lines for these 4 groups was moved from the state legislature to an independent commission made up of 14 California voters. Their process includes a lot of public hearings and getting feedback from the public via a wide variety of methods. They do all of their work, including drawing the lines, in public. You can watch their hearings online, you can provide feedback. The first Redistricting Commission in 2010 was successful in drawing all 4 sets of maps. And the results were district maps that better represented a wider range of California communities. It may not have been perfect, but it was a lot better than when the legislature was in charge. The 2020 Commission, the second one for California, has been chosen and has begun its work. So we think of the release of the census information and data as triggering redistricting, the redrawing of maps. I'm just, as a side note, I'll say that in California, we do one extra step to that census data. We do a modification to allow people who are currently in state prison they are counted in the communities from which they come. And so they're counted in their homes rather than the areas in which they're in prison. Someone described this as taking the people from one particular concentrated prison area and sprinkling them all over California. In reality, the process doesn't start with the release of the data. It starts now, before the census data is released. The State Commission is asking all of us to talk about our communities of interest, our neighborhoods, and which of our neighbors we want to be in districts with. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. There is a computer app for the State Commission that allows anyone with access to a computer to draw a map of your own community. And so let me talk about what the criteria are and how the State Commission actually goes about drawing its maps. They use a ranked set of criteria to determine where district boundaries should be drawn. By ranked criteria, it means using the important measures first, or the rules, and they have a priority sequence. For California, the top priority is that you have equal population in districts. The second is that you follow the Voting Rights Act, the Federal Voting Rights Act. The third is that the districts need to be contiguous. That means they need to be connected and touching. I can't have part of a district in San Francisco and another part of that district in Sacramento. Then the next criterion is to respect city and county boundary lines and preserve communities of interest, and that's all equal. This is because this is the key point of redistricting decision making. There are two more criterion that don't usually get applied. One is that they be geographically compact, as long as it doesn't conflict with any of the higher level criteria. And then the final one is that if at all possible, try to nest 2 assembly districts in every state Senate district. And I don't think that's going to happen either. The key point to remember is that the redistricting commissioners will be using their best judgment when considering how communities of interest are respected and included in the new district maps. They can and they should go beyond meeting bare legal minimum requirements to draw districts. We want them to draw districts which empower people to engage with their representatives. So let's talk about communities of interest. What do we mean by that? The California Constitution describes it this way. A community of interest is a contiguous population which shares common social and economic interests that should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. A community of so it's a community of residents who live nearby each other and share some kind of interest. It could be economic levels, it could be social, it could be cultural ties, a lot of things. You could be shared interest in schools and housing, community safety, transit, health conditions, land use, environmental conditions, and any other issues that we can think of. And so this is the key thing that we need to be thinking about for redistricting. And this is true at every level of redistricting. But for the State Commission, we're being asked to provide information about our communities of interest. And there is a tool that they have on the statewide redistricting data on their website that allows you to draw your own community of interest. It's pretty simple to use. We hope people will learn to use it and help others. You can also submit a paper map and draw maps that include neighborhood features and lines. You can give them written or oral testimony about a community of interest. It's important to remember that you need to define it by describing physical boundaries or landmarks, streets. It's also important to include about what brings the community together, what it is that defines that community. And then there are bonus points if you add what nearby neighborhoods or groups are best to be combined with to make a larger district and which ones are worse. So then I'm going to do a very quick overview of local redistricting, and then I'm going to turn this over. So we have lots of different levels. And a local government, every local government entity which has single member districts has to redraw those district lines every 10 years. And sometimes this redistricting at that small and local level can be one where people can have the greatest impact on government and influence the policy that affects our daily lives. So here are some examples of local redistricting bodies. There's all kinds of them. It's just a few examples. And there are some new laws. I'm going to cover for cities and counties, and these San Francisco as a charter city, county city, you have your rules written into your charter, but to the extent that it's not written into your charter, these new laws do apply. And it has rank criteria that are very similar to the state criteria, public outreach requirements, and some public hearing requirements. And that's for cities and counties throughout the state. Education districts, on the other hand, have very few rules. And so we're suggesting that it's up to us, the public, to challenge those boards as they redraw lines to use best practices and get public input and draw maps that reflect that public input. Likewise, special districts have very few rules that apply. And so we're, if to the extent that you know about them and you think that they're important, we're asking that you help challenge them to use best practices and lots of good public input. A little bit about the league's role. We want transparent process at every level. We want full public participation at every level, with an emphasis on communities or groups who have not been heard or represented well in the past. We want maps that reflect this public input and that are fair. And as much as possible, we want maps that keep communities together in districts, again, with a priority on communities who have been underrepresented. And finally, a reminder that redistricting is happening at multiple levels: the state, the Congress, supervisors, city councils, school districts, community college boards, special districts, and it's all going to be happening at the same time. The actual map drawing will be happening in this fall and into the winter. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn this back over. So
I think we're shockingly running a couple minutes ahead, which is, I feel like that's beautiful for us. So I was wondering if do we have any questions that we fielded in the chat for Helen? Helen is going to have to drop off a little bit early. So if you have questions for her, we might want to take those just in the few minutes that we have right now. And I don't know, I know we have a few moderators who are taking a look at.
Yeah, so if you'd like to,
like
to ask a question, the chat is open. So if you just, on the bottom of your screen, if you hover on the bottom, there should be a button that says chat. If you click on that, it'll be a little pop-up. And you should see where you can enter your questions to the hosts, and we will be able to see your questions for Helen.
And it does look like we have one. So I think at the state level, we're wondering, we have somebody who's wondering how do we decide which representative at a state level is lost, right? I guess based on some of the data that has come out recently from the Census Bureau, right? California is going to lose a seat. How do we decide?
So in reality, it's going to be absorbed throughout the state. Instead of drawing 53 congressional districts, the state commission will be drawing 52. And so that just means it's not that there's going to be one district taken out and suddenly people don't have a representative. Everybody will still be represented, but the district maps were going to change anyhow because we've moved. We know that there's been population shifts. And this just adds a little bit more to what is going to happen in those shifts. There's no one district that is going away. It is that all of the lines are going to change. I'm going to add, I just put an email address for me in the chat. So if people have questions afterwards, you can feel free to send me emails afterwards.
Awesome. And I guess with the timeline for that, right, because they're going to redraw the lines, is the idea that there's no like one district official that's going to kind of lose their job?
No,
right?
There's no one that's going to lose a job or gain a job. I mean, the last time around, they started, they start from a blank slate and start drawing lines, and suddenly they did not, and the state commission may not take into account where incumbents live. And so if incumbents happen to live close to each other, or they draw a map that puts two of them in the same district, then suddenly they need to, either one of them needs to move or they have to run against each other, or we don't know. But I'm thinking that that is probably the same rule for your San Francisco redistricting, but I don't know about whether you can take where incumbents live into account. I'll tell you that for Oakland, we carefully said, no, you may not take into account where the incumbents live. So, yeah.
Okay. And I think, Allison, unless you see one in the chat that I don't see, is there anything else for Helen?
I do not see any questions at this moment. No.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Awesome. And do redistricting at lwvc.org is where you can reach Helen if you have questions after this that kind of pop into your mind. All right. We are going to take it away with Eric McDonnell.
Oh, hold on just a second.
Did we get one?
Seeing a question in the chat. Could we get an example of why a special interest community, for example, people with kids or people with pets, would not want even distribution across San Francisco versus a concentration in one district?
So if you have people with children, if you happen to, I'm telling people that so you have an even distribution, but if there's a concentration of a population that could have a district drawn, you could use that as a community of interest. I think school attendance boundaries are a very clear area where you could say there is a population that has a community of interest. I don't think it's a matter of whether you want to be distributed across that. It is that, you know, and it may be, there was an example somebody gave about advocating for a pet park. That's not the right word, but anyhow, that they wanted a park that allowed pets to play. And so I think that if you had a concentration of people who lived in an area that did not have a good dog park, then and wanted one, that could be a community of interest. If you are evenly distributed across the city, then it doesn't make a very strong community of interest, because you do need to be a concentration of a population that could influence the election in some kind of a district. So, does that make sense?
That makes sense to
Okay.
me.
Okay, good. Then I'm going to say goodbye and thank you all very much. This was fun.
Thank you
for
very
being
much,
here,
Helen. Yeah, we very much appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we're going to take it away with Eric McDonnell. Eric has served as the chairman or the chair of the SF Redistricting Task Force in 2011. So, you know, this happens every 10 years. So he's pretty much got the most recent experience of sitting on the Redistricting Task Force. And he currently serves as a commissioner for the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. He's a native San Franciscan, committed to being civically engaged to make the city a diverse and equitable place to live, work, and play. And I am going to hand it off to Eric to give a little bit more detail on his background and then how he got started with the San Francisco Redistricting Task Force. So you'll mostly hear questions from me and much longer answers from Eric because he's got the content that's going on.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Good to see everyone this evening. First, just a quick big thanks to League of Women Voters for holding this space, this commitment to redistricting. I will confess, even as I share my background and what brought me to the space, is that in 2008, no, 9, if you had asked me, what's a redistricting task force? What do they do? How do they do it? I would have said, I have no clue. Active voter, civically engaged, but I will confess my ignorance. And so my short story is this. I came into well, let me back up just a half step. So native San Franciscan, born in San Francisco General Hospital, grew up in what was then called the Fillmore, lives a period of time in Lakeview, and have lived for the last 12 years in Bayview, Hunters Point. And my experience going through San Francisco Unified School Districts, I'm a product of the district, City College, University of San Francisco, was experiencing in our wonderfully progressive, forward-thinking city, disparities, particularly in the context of resource allocation. And it puzzled me why that was so prominent, beside the very basic issues, candidly, of race and inequities that exist around that. So that part I understood, but why some of the resulting distributions of resources were so significant and uneven. And it was through conversations with who has become a good friend, Jane Kim, who at the time was the district supervisor in District 6, who we were literally at a concert. And she said, you should apply to be on the redistricting task force. To which I responded, what's the redistricting task force? She then explained, literally over the loud music, here's what they do, here's why it's important. I know that you care about the representation on the Board of Soups, as well as the resulting resource allocation across the city. This body of work is fundamental to informing, again, representation and the resulting distribution of resources. And so that's what kind of piqued my interest. And I then applied and obviously became chair of the process. And at a high level, and I actually want to just speak to, well, let me just finish the thought. At a high level, it was one of the most enlightening learning opportunities from a civic engagement perspective I've had. And I've tried to, be consistent throughout my adult life, at least, being civically engaged. I learned so much about our city, this city I've lived in almost all of my life. And therefore really encourage any and all of you, so this is kind of my pitch, please join, please lean into this. It is so important, whether you're on the task force, volunteering to support engagement in the work of the task force, it is really, really incredibly important. And so, Danielle, I'll stop there in terms of overview and then answer other questions.
Awesome. So I think that the first kind of question that we want to understand a little bit more is, can you give us like a day in the life of the San Francisco Redistricting Task Force, right? Like, what was a typical meeting like? What kind of issues were you covering, that kind of stuff?
So hopefully this is still encouraging to you, to everyone, and I mean it that way. So the process of assessing and determining how, where, and how to reapportion the supervisorial district lines really is basically finds rather that there are two components of every meeting every single time. The first component is listening to public comment. We held over the course of 8 months, 30 meetings, as short as 2 hours, as long as 7.5 hours was our longest meeting. And that was nearing the end when we were really hands-on trying to determine how best to draw the lines. So that was kind of the range. And we heard over 1,300 written and/or public comments. So a lion's share of the meetings then were listening to public comment of constituents. And we declared one of our goals was to hear as many diverse perspectives and constituent groups across the city as possible. One of the things that we did to that end was we took at least one meeting to each of the supervisorial districts, just to make the meeting itself more accessible to community members. And so of those 30 meetings, 11 of them were out in districts so that we could again invite voices in. And I'm pleased to say that I feel like we heard a wonderfully wide range of voices, constituents, stakeholders, and it was really informative then to the drawing of the redrawing rather of the district lines. The second part of the meeting then is the redrawing of the lines. What the kind of regulations stipulated then, I believe they're still the same now, is that following the 2010 census, San Francisco grew by about 23,000 residents, about a 3.5% increase. And in that, we don't have time for open question, but really quick, just in your mind, which district do you think grew the most? And then I'll tell you the answer. So the district that grew the most, interestingly, it was surprising to me at the time, was District 6. District 6 is south of Market, a little part of Potrero Hill, kind of goes down to the water. And it includes Treasure Island uniquely. And I say uniquely because, as Helen said accurately and appropriately, supervisory districts are required to be contiguous. And San Francisco has had to stretch the definition of contiguous, by allowing the bridge to be the contiguous part of including Treasure Island in District 6. So District 6 grew disproportionately more than all of the other districts across the city. And so what that presented then as a challenge and opportunity for the task force was to reapportion by essentially redistributing District 6 population out and across the city, and then the resulting ripples that occurred, all within what I was going to say a moment ago, the regulations of the difference in population size to ensure equal representation meant that the difference in population could not be more than 1%. And so every iterative change created a ripple, and we had to then reassess whether we were still within plus or minus 1%. And so each meeting then became one part listening to public comment and the perspectives, and then one part assessing where and how district lines might be redrawn in light of not only the public comment in the room that night or that particular meeting, but also in the data we were holding as a whole. And so that was the nature of our meetings, the lion's share of which was public comment. And just as a quick sidebar, but relevant, there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Bowman. Mr. Bowman, I met Mr. Bowman at the Rules Committee when I was being considered for appointment to the task force. Mr. Bowman objected, and I should say as parenthetically, appropriately, based on what he understood to be the facts. Because as I was being considered, Mr. Bowman was so committed, wonderfully committed to this process, and wanted to ensure that members of the task force were best suited to be engaged, that they already had some track record of civic engagement. And Mr. Bowman went to the city records and found that for 7 years, at least per the records, I had not voted in San Francisco. And for Mr. Bowman, this was, what's the word? An anathema. You could not possibly lead the redistricting task force and be someone who isn't even voting in the city or hadn't voted in over that period of time. And so one of the members of the task force who was prepared to endorse my being appointed, of the Rules Committee, called me up to the side and said, "So I understand these 7 years you didn't vote. What's going on?" I said, "Actually, I wasn't living in the city then. Those were 7 years I was living in Vallejo. If you check those records, you'll find that I did vote every year. I've since been back in the city and blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Okay, and move forward." And so I actually introduced myself to Mr. Bowman. I appreciate your concern, and explained to him what the circumstances were. We're fine. Mr. Bowman attended every single meeting of the task force. He probably gave testimony maybe 6 to 8 times around things he held as important. But he was a wonderful watchdog, if you will, to support this process and to ensure that it was done well on behalf of the city. So that's the nature of the meetings.
That's a lot of detail, and actually I really appreciate it. My one follow-up, which is probably going to be super short,
Yep.
is how much time do people actually really need to set aside, right? If they want to do this and they want to do it well over the course of the time frame that you're serving, how much time are you really committing to this?
So I probably could have committed a little more time as I became chair, but other members, one meeting a week at least. And again, on average, while I told you the long and short, or the short and long, 2 and 7, the average was probably 4. So it's one meeting a week, 4 hours is a typical thing that you should plan for. And then plan for some offline kind of reading of written public comment, some studying of some of the reports around the census and where some of the shifts were, both at a macro and micro level. So I would say add another 2 hours a week, perhaps. So about 6 hours a week.
And then I'm going to ask you one more question, talk a little bit about local action that people can take, and then we're going to do Q&A. So my question for you is, can you talk about something in 2011 that you're particularly proud of in terms of the accomplishments? And then maybe like a quick, critical of improvements that you could have made, right, to the process that you guys took.
So in terms of an accomplishment, I think this qualifies. It was important to us as a task force, as I mentioned earlier, that we could hear from as many constituents and stakeholders as possible. Included in that, in terms of constituent and stakeholder kind of groups, there were a number of, I'm going to call them associations of varied types, who came forward and candidly tried to kind of exercise, not necessarily undue influence, but disproportional influence, because they saw themselves as an association. Therefore, their voice should be kind of considered more significantly than the individual kind of citizen stakeholder. And we didn't subscribe to that. And I feel like that was an accomplishment. It would have been easy to say, these big groups, perhaps with large memberships or not, were exerting or influencing over more than they should as compared to the individual voices. And I feel like we held very consistently the importance of every single voice in the process, and that then influenced the results. One critical piece is actually that particular dynamic. And I don't know what can be done about it. I mean, it's an open and public process, as it should be. But I would be concerned if this upcoming or any other task force that are convened would shift that or tilt towards giving those voices more weight and kind of clout in the process. That would be concerning to me. And then the other is just what you all are doing is really fantastic, because my critique of before of the prior process, it was widely invisible. Had not Jane Kim literally called me and then, as I said, talked to me at a concert, I would not have known it was even happening. And so bringing greater visibility through all of the, the wonderful social media tools, et cetera, I think would be fantastic.
Excellent. So thank you very much, Eric. I am going to do a really quick 2 slides on things that you can do on kind of local action, and then we're going to do some Q&A and then do a wrap up. So let me share real quick. All right. So local action. If you are watching this and you are interested in what you can do locally, we have 2 things that we would really encourage you as the League of Women Voters to do. One is apply for this open position on the San Francisco Redistricting Task Force. It's through the Elections Commission. And what you'll see is there's a URL here, and actually it's been linked in the chat as well by Jen Say. But you go to this URL, you're going to get a page that's going to come up, and it's going to show you applications and announcements. You'll see they're in multiple languages. You open up this announcement and application, and the application is right there. You can submit it either via email or you can mail it in if you want to. So that's the very first thing is, and also look at this and promoting it on your social media channels, share it with groups. If you're a league member, share it, outside the league with other diverse groups. If you're a potential other 501(c) that's attending this meeting, definitely encourage your members and other people that you know in the community to apply for this open position. And then the other one is, we are the League of Women Voters. We have a team we're calling the Fair Maps team that is promoting redistricting. If you are interested, you can go to our website at lwvsf.org/redistricting. You can volunteer there. There's a form. You can tell us kind of what you're interested in working on. You can just sign up and get emails and attend events, or you can email if you're a partner at redistricting@lwvsf.org. And the slides, by the way, for this presentation will also be made available along with the recording. So if you're not able to kind of get things down fast enough, you'll get the slides so you can cut and paste, which is definitely easier for everybody. And now I am going to hand it off to Allison, who is going to field some of the Q&A questions.
Sure. So we have a number of questions. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to condense some of these in the interest of time. So because of the release of the census data, we're talking about what if the redistricting task force was convened tomorrow, what can the task force accomplish before it gets the census data? Similarly, do you have a general timeline on redistricting? When will the decisions be made? And I think there's been several questions about timelines and when these things are going to happen. So do you have any insight into that based off of your previous experience?
I don't have insight into how they're going to kind of recalibrate the timeline in light of the delayed census data. But as it relates to what a task force could begin to do now, while the official data isn't available, I believe there is data kind of in the broadest sense around shifts in population. And so what a task force could begin to do now, if they were so appointed, will begin to look at that data and to begin to do some assessment or analysis of where the shifts have been most significant or insignificant, to appreciate at a macro level the kinds of considerations that will need to be made once the official data is made available. So I would, again, think that could be valuable. And even in that context, I think you could, and I would, if I were engaged, begin to engage community in that discussion, begin to hear priorities, begin to hear concerns, et cetera, and begin that process. Because as I said, a significant part of the process, at least as we held it as a task force, was to hear from community. And so I believe some of that can begin now, even in advance of the official data. But I don't have insights into how they're going to recalibrate the timeline. I do know that when we were convened, we had, and I'd have to talk with, John Arntz, when he announced it, when he walked us through the timing and timeline, there was a line of kind of, the finish line was declared when we started. And I'm sorry, I can't remember whether that was, I believe it was here's what it was. It was to inform upcoming elections. And so our deadline was April 14th. However, whatever you do, however much you do, you must be finished by April 14th, because we must certify the new supervisorial districts so that we can then implement the upcoming June election. So given that it's delayed 6 months, how might they, my guess would be, and it's really just a guess, so assign it to me and not some official statement, that they would likely push that deadline out but ensure that it is completed in advance of the, there you go. The upcoming San Francisco redistricting process needs to be finished by, so they're holding the same thing. Ours was April 14th, and this says April 15th.
Great. I'm going to combine a couple of questions that we've received about districts. Do special districts include community benefit districts? There's been a question about, do you divide enumeration districts? And then relatedly, does precincting come before or after all of these lines are drawn and maps are finalized?
The precincting are drawn after the lines are drawn, because if you imagine as a puzzle, as it were, you draw the lines, the boundaries first, and then precincts are recalibrated because they already exist, and so there are the implications of those, but that's done post. Sorry, what was the first part of your question?
Do special districts, does that mean like community benefit districts? And then do you ever divide enumeration districts?
No to the second part of the question. Yes, community benefits districts kind of fall in that category. Yes.
That's great. Let's see. What are some other questions? Are there any voters on the I would never know how to say this, Florence or Red Rock Island?
In 2011, there were none that we were aware of. That said, it does raise another interesting point, I think, which is one of the things we, at least going into it, we hadn't thought about or considered was the unhoused. And so that came up, I won't say significantly, but came up importantly in our process as we were. And so we heard a lot of both advocates in terms of supporting the unhoused, and also park advocates who around which a lot of the unhoused were residing. So yeah.
Great. So these redistricting meetings, are these during weekday office hours, during like 9 to 5 p.m.? And when do you think that they will start their work? And how do you attend election commission meetings?
So, sorry, you said election committee meetings or the redistricting?
The redistricting task force meetings.
Oh, okay. So all of our meetings were evening. So after work hours, and they were open as our, all city commission and our board meetings are open to the public. It will be, I would guess or anticipate that they will include, as we have done during the pandemic, they will include some virtual attendance, but I don't know that as a fact. But they're completely open. And again, because a lion's share of the meetings, at least as we held them, were focused on public comment, I was actually very pleased that public came out and shared views, both when we were at City Hall for the majority of the meetings, but then also when we went out into community.
Sure. I have two questions about specifics about serving on the task force, if you can answer these. One is, if we ran for assembly district delegate, does that disqualify based off of the minimum requirements? For example, it says, has not been a candidate for political office or paid by a SF candidate campaign in less than 5 years?
I think, I don't know this as hard fact, but the kind of the operative piece of that is within 5 years. So yes, to the, if you've run for that elected office, if it was in that window, it likely disqualifies you, but I would ask the office of the John Arndt's office.
An audience member wants to know if you are involved in the upcoming task force.
No.
Relatedly, when you're in your experience in 2011, some of the themes that you got in public comment, what were some of the themes? Were they typically concerns of a neighborhood? Were they personal? What are some of the things and overarching, again, themes that you heard when doing public comment?
So yeah, great question. Broadly stated themes really did run the gamut, because we really had constituents and stakeholders that were broadly concerned about literally their supervisor. I'll keep it all nameless, but we were in one district and that district supervisor was present, which was not uncommon or unexpected. But there were individuals who came to the mic in public comment to declare, we need you to change the lines in our district so that we can get rid of this supervisor. So it got that pointed. And then there were folks who, probably the most consistent themes, some of which surprised me, quite honestly, were parks, churches, and local stores. And it was fascinating to me because you would have thought we were not just redrawing supervisory lines, but actual walls, because folks were concerned that somehow our efforts to draw the lines would impact their church community or would impact their, their favorite dry cleaner or, neighborhood store. It was fascinating. The one troubling thing that did arise, and it was, again, as a native San Franciscan, it was surprising and disappointing that particularly when we moved out into districts, it was common to hear who they didn't want in their district. And to, therefore ensure that lines were drawn to protect their existing community.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're running up against our time limit. Besides what's based on the application, from your experience, what makes a good task force member?
Open to the perspectives that will be brought into the room, and, literally or figuratively, and committed to the, holistically the best for San Francisco. I'm not sure it's in the best interest of the task force itself, different from an advocate on the outside, but the task force itself to bring an agenda to that, to ensure that X happens or Y happens. Just my point of view. I'm not saying I'm right, but that the best is committed to our city, committed to holding best interest of the city, and then an openness to the perspectives that will inform where you then draw the lines.
That's very helpful. And I appreciate you answering a lot of these questions that have come in. I'm going to hand it off to one of our membership co-chairs, Cheryl Harris, to close us out.
Well, I want to say thank you so much, Eric, for all your information. It was very enlightening. And I want to thank everybody today for joining us with these informative sessions that we have about the community equal restriction programs outcoming. I just want to remind everybody, as Allison stated, that the League of Women Voters of San Francisco is a volunteer-run organization. We rely 100% on the members to do all the work. We do all the work here for defending democracy, as well as just trying to join all the communities together. We do have a lot of events that's going to be coming up. And so I definitely want you guys to put this on the notes because I don't want to keep you guys too longer. We have an event coming up on May the 19th. So if you can be a part of that, that'd be great. You can find all this information on our website. We also have an annual meeting coming up on June the 15th at 6 p.m. We also have our annual conference that's going to be coming in with the Leader Women Voters of California. That is something amazing, and I think everybody should get involved and really get to know your complete California lead as well. So you are totally welcome to come. That's going to be June the 7th to the 13th. You can call in or email us for the additional information. And then we're going to have this the second series of the People Powering Redistricting event that's going to be held again in August. So please, please inform your friends, tell the people in your neighborhood to be involved, to get involved in this so they can also, help resolve and, support this movement. We also have another event in October later. It's going to be focusing on the housingist. So be a part of it. Please join. You can always look for us in our newsletter that we sent out, the Voters News. We also send out letters monthly as a reminder of the different events that's happening, as well as just follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You will be receiving an email from us as well after this survey, just to see exactly what more would you like to hear and what we can do for you to provide you with the things that you need. I want to thank everybody again for coming. And if you have any questions, you have all our contact information. Feel free to use it and have a wonderful, great weekend. This will conclude the ending of the meeting.